Hi, I'm John Barlow. Welcome to another episode of the Simply Connected podcast, where we aim to unpack the complexities of the broadband and connectivity industries. Today, I'm joined by Michael Philpott from Omdia. Great to have you, Michael.
Hi, John. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So I'm looking forward to this conversation today. I've got a lot of questions in the back pocket ready for you, but to start with, maybe it'd be good for you to give a bit of an introduction to yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Philpott. I'm a senior research director for Omdia, specializing in the telco B2C market. So basically, we look at everything to do with the consumer market through a telco's lens. So what's the opportunity for telecommunication operators, right through from broadband and mobile data services, through to the value-added services, and then into and beyond. So what are they doing in the smart home? What they're doing around energy? What they're doing around finance services, etc. So it's really about advising our telco clients and the vendors that supply them as to what the best opportunity is for them, where the growth is, and how to take advantage of that.
Great. So one of the assets that you release from Omdia in collaboration with the Broadband Forum and others is the Future of the Connected Home report. And I know in particular, I found this really, really useful. I'm sure there are many others who've leveraged the information that you share with this. So I think this is the third report that you've shared this year. So maybe you can share a little bit of, I guess, what's the response to that been like so far?
Yeah, so the forum itself, the response has been great. They don't just get a report. So if you're a member of the Broadband Forum, you also get access to the data that goes into that. So all the survey data that we collect. And I know that, certainly from feedback from those members, that they find that really valuable in part of their strategy development. But as well as that, I mean, this is a key area that forms a part of my own research. And I know that through that, the connected home is such a really important part of an operator's strategy today, not just in terms of that broadband strategy and creating a good quality of service through that. The importance of the home network has really grown in that space, but also then the innovation going into that and how that can drive new services and new opportunities for operators is really key. So we find that the feedback, both on the forum report as well as the research that we do in this area, is really vital to those service providers.
Okay, and this has been around since 2021. Was there something that kind of triggered the need for this information, this type of information to be shared with telcos, operators, and people that are in the value chain of delivering broadband solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been the rise of the importance of that part of the broadband network. I think that we were certainly seeing that in terms of our own research, and I think the Broadband Forum saw that as well and had a need to expand their research and also their own work in those areas, moving from just obviously the forum has always been really key in terms of their standards and their research around just the broadband CPE, but they wanted to extend that as they saw the number of connected devices really expanding in the home. So they kind of saw a need for that type of research for their members, and that's why they launched this part of their research as part of course, their own ongoing work in this area.
And I guess the nature of this report is kind of, point in time, looking at where we are, I guess, reflecting a little bit on how we've got here and then and looking a little bit ahead as to what we might see for the future. Yeah. With the reports you've done up until now, what are the kind of shifts and changes you've seen over that time?
Yeah, you're right. That's always the advantage of doing repeat studies. I mean, you get a great lot of information and knowledge from the first one, but what becomes really interesting is as you get to the second and third study, you can start to do that reflection. And certainly we've done quite a lot of that in this report. We've kind of looked back and see how things have changed. And yeah, it's really interesting how telcos almost maybe even go through cycles. We see that quite a lot, really. So in the first report, it was all about investing in the connected home from that broadband quality point of view, that's where all the focus was on at that time. The second report, then you can start to see them thinking, well, we've kind of done this. We've invested in this quality experience. We've invested in the Wi-Fi hardware and the software, and now we want to utilize that to move into value-added services and drive new broadband growth and new ARPU and things like that. And then in the third report, interestingly enough, we saw a kind of almost a step back from that. And so that it's not that they're not interested in the value-added services, but they just seemed less optimistic on using those as a way of driving growth and more of a way of just positioning them to continue to drive that quality of experience. So that was kind of an interesting change. And of course, in the future, I'm hopeful that we see a shift back, because I do believe that there is good opportunity for telcos around those value-added services in driving growth. And I'm a true believer that that's where operators need to go. They need to start positioning themselves for growth rather than just protecting against churn. So in future, I hope that we see that swing back.
You're right, because I mean they need to do something, right? I think it's been talked about for a long time that speed is no longer enough of a differentiator. I think we still see some operators that are kind of fighting that speed versus price battle, but
Oh, it's quite a lot, quite a lot. I mean, strangely enough, we've just also launched our Omdia. Every year does this kind of trends to watch. So what are the big three trends for the following year? And I just posted something on LinkedIn, and the post on LinkedIn, I actually kind of went back to the first time we did it, which was 2015, or at least that's the first one I could find. In my filing system. And even back in 2015, we were talking about the need to move to quality experience. So 10 years ago, we were talking about that. And we also attend obviously the things like Network X events every year. And that always seems to be a big topic about the move away from speed and quality. So, but yeah, you look around and operators are still marketing speed and price. I mean, not everyone, but a lot of operators are still focusing around that. And a big reason for that, I think, is that as markets start to saturate, because they relied so heavily on their growth in just getting new customers. It's always been about we don't really care about ARPU because we put in more customers, more revenue. The issue is as they start to reach that saturation point, the focus goes down onto churn. And when they look at their own surveys and things like that, what customers are telling them is the reason why they might move is either because they want something a bit cheaper, or they want a higher speed. So that that data is telling them that to fight against churn, we need to focus on speed and price. So they struggle to get out of that cycle. And there are ways out of that cycle. It's just that they're kind of sometimes a bit scared to make that move.
And what's interesting as well is they're fighting against, I guess, other factors that are coming in. Like, there's things coming in to try and make it easier for people to move from one broadband provider to the next. So actually, they're fighting against other forces as well as just their competitors. But like regulation.
And that's what I mean about that cycle. Because if you're only focusing on speed versus price, then there's nothing to stop the consumer, because everyone has high speed, everyone has reasonable prices. So what's to stop the consumer every time their contract is up, or as you say, as it becomes easier for them to move even within their contract? They think, well, I could just get a little bit higher speed or a little lower price. There's nothing to stop them moving from one to the other here.
I think in your report you said, I think as much as 89% of consumers believe they have enough speed. Sorry. So they're happy with the speed that they're getting. I think they've probably got a surplus actually of speed for the use cases that they need today. So kind of enter value-added services as the big focus area for many operators, and a lot of which you talk about in this report. So you also mentioned the report there will be growth. You expect to see growth between I think up to 400 billion by 2030. But actually the suggestion is that doesn't come from value-added services as such, but more from new subscriptions. So where do you have a view of where that new subscription revenue is coming from?
I mean, we make those points to kind of show that how important, how big and how important the broadband markets are. I mean, you see so much in the press about online video and gaming and things like that. We need to remember that broadband is bigger than all those industries.
Okay.
It's a huge industry, and it is a still growing industry. You're quite right, but most of that growth is coming from developing markets still. So yeah, on a global basis, you can say the market is worth this. It's growing by, I think, about 4% CAGR every year. But there are many countries out there that are below 3%. I can't remember the exact percentages, but you're probably getting like 10% of countries where it's below 1%. So you can see that
Wow.
the trend is that gradually, if we don't do anything now, then gradually that 4% CAGR on a global basis will kind of edge towards the zero mark as more countries kind of start to saturate. And that's what we need to fight. That's what we need to kind of fight against. We've got lots of data, and I think we show that in the report as well, that if you draw a line, or if you draw a chart which measures subscription growth and revenue growth, and then draw a line, it's quite a very clear line that just you can do it at the country level, or you can do it at an operator level, and it just goes through the zero mark, and they're all kind of following that line.
Yep.
It's not all actually, because we do have best of breed case studies that show even in mature markets that some operators are managing to buck that trend. But the overall trend is that so operators really need to learn from those best of breed players to understand how they can grow not just their customer base but also their ARPUs.
So yeah, you mentioned that in the report, and I quite like the way you've illustrated that best of breed versus best of suite kind of approaches. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what that means, and how you differentiate between the type of operator when you're talking about best of breed versus best of suite?
Yeah, so in that we were talking about how the operators choose the vendor strategy, basically. So what we mean by that is, so we talked about best of suite, and that's about choosing basically a vendor that comes with a kind of a package. So the broadband services, maybe even the CPE devices, and a ready-made ecosystem of value-added services that the operator can choose from. And there's a number of vendors out there that will offer that type of product. But they're pretty much, and it's a good solution. It means that you can deliver things quite quickly, but it is a kind of a proprietary type of solution. So you kind of locked in with that vendor, and of course the ecosystem of partners that they bring to the table. So, whereas the best of suite type of scenario is where operators use open standards and open frameworks to basically take more control of the stack, and in some cases the complete stack. Right from chipsets right through to the software layer as well. And what that means then is that the operators have full control over the hardware vendors they choose, the chipsets that in those hardware, the software platforms that they deploy, and the value-added services that they put on top. So there's so much more of a kind of an open system, and also it helps. At least the concept is that it helps those software developers as well, because if everything is based on an open standard, it means that a developer can develop one thing for let's say Orange in France, and then just take it to Deutsche Telekom in Germany, and literally without doing any work deploy the same type of application. So that was the kind of concept of that. The issue with it is that you have to have a lot of expertise and investment to be able to kind of take that on. So what we're finding is that it really is the really big players that are taking that type of strategy, and everyone else has to kind of do something they're not quite going to the the best of suite, but they're trying to do something kind of in the middle because they don't have the internal capability, or they don't want to take that risk
Yeah.
to kind of go down that route.
Yeah, and I think that feels like that we're at the stage now of the tier ones, and the ones that have the bigger budgets, that they have the bigger kind of the skill sets to be able to drive that. That has been happening for some time in terms of, I guess, the open source platform adoption. But yeah, I suppose for those that are, there'll be the latent comers of I'll wait until it's out there and it's more standardized and I can kind of pick up on the coattails, if you like, to some degree, because I guess the bulk of that work needs to be done. The lumpy work, let's say, the work that needs to be done to get it out there, learn from a few of the mistakes, and then refine it, and then allow those that are maybe in the tier twos and tier threes to kind of pick up with more packaged solutions as a natural result of that. So I guess it's a natural flow of maybe what will happen over time.
Yeah, because to a certain extent, it's also about risk. Those that are willing to take the risk, and we could talk about risk at a company level. Whether the board is willing to back those types of risks, but also even on a personal level, you can really tell that some of the CTOs in these companies, kind of take that risk on almost personally. It's not just the companies that sometimes have the biggest budgets or the biggest number of subscribers. It's also the ones that are also willing to take those risks.
So let's maybe get into some of the meatier stuff around some of those value added services then. So we know broadband is going to grow, and I think that sounds like from some of the emerging markets that's where we're going to see some of that growth. ARPU stays flat, so from an operator in the more mature markets, it doesn't seem like those operators are able to monetize services for their end users. So what does it take to get to that point, where consumers are feeling like they're getting sufficient value to be able to say, there's features, there's use cases that you're helping me with as my broadband operator, which they're used to being a dumb pipe, let's say. What does it take to kind of get them over that hump in your view, Michael?
So do you mean get the consumers over the hump?
Consumer, yeah. I mean, it's hard to get money out of their pocket, granted, but do you have a view of what it might take? Part of it is, and I've had this conversation a few times on this podcast with others, and we've had similar conversations, and I think there's this perception that they provide you with connectivity and they give you a little black box that you put in the corner of your room and then you forget about it, but you're connected. Great. But actually turning operators and ISPs are kind of trying to make that shift to be more of a service provider, right? So they want to widen out the value they can offer. But obviously there's a process to get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think that seems to be the kind of the part we're at the moment where we can't quite get the value across to the end user. We can't quite get them over that. Oh yeah, you are giving me some real value here. I'm quite happy that there's value in increasing my subscription for those services. Do you have a view on that?
It comes down to engagement in one way or another, and that's a simple way of saying it because it's not as easy as just that. But that's what it comes down to. And within that, we're talking about the product position in a first place. There's no point investing in any type of, say, let's just take one type of value-added service. Let's just take cybersecurity as just a simple example, but it could be anything. There's no point investing in it. As you say, you got a black box in the corner. We're going to add cybersecurity. But if you don't tell the consumer that you've added that, or it's not positioned in the portfolio so that it's quite clear and obvious that those features exist. If you're not engaging with the consumers either through marketing or some other channel that you're offering those type of services, and what's the value of that type of cybersecurity? Why is that cybersecurity better than what you could just buy off the shelf? Why you even need cybersecurity? Because there's millions of consumers walking around that they're not protected in any possible way, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're not doing that engagement, that communication, then it's no surprise really that consumers then don't take it. So it's just a massive waste of investment. So yes, you need to invest in technology. You need to invest in the applications to get them down there, but you also need to engage with the consumers to make them a success. Because if you don't, it's obviously that everything's going to fail. And what we find is that as you say, what the telcos will then come back and say, oh, the consumers aren't interested. They kind of, they have that mentality. It's the consumer's fault. They're not interested in cybersecurity. Of course, they're interested in cybersecurity. I mean, you hear it on the news all the time about, the kind of the fraud, the scams, especially the AI technology. Because the world's becoming a scary place. But yeah, if you're not kind of positioning your products properly, then the consumers aren't going to buy it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I like I know, again, one of the other things that I have conversations around a lot around this is connectivity, and your broadband is now effectively a commodity, right? It's like your a utility now. So actually, you need to find those ways of adding value.
Yeah. I mean, even that, I kind of dispute. And I don't think telcos are making as much really of that. I mean, I work from home. I don't know about yourself, John, but there's,
Mm.
there's millions of people around the world that either work from home all the time or at least part of the time. Um, you get that's just one segment. You get people that obviously serious gamers. You get people that most of the entertainment comes through the internet these days. So, to say that it's a commodity where you just turn it on and off, it'd be like electricity. I don't quite kind of agree with that. I would love to, and it's not just about speed either. You can buy a 1 gig broadband service, which, as you said in your introduction, is probably far more than you ever really require. But that doesn't mean you're going to get a great service. So I think there's many people out there that would kind of pay a little bit extra and do pay a little extra. I mentioned those kind of best of breed players that are increasing their ARPU, and that's because they're kind of positioning their services better, often around connectivity, and consumers are willing to kind of pay for that. But again, it has to be positioned right. If you're just going to offer a flat standard connectivity service, there you go, take it, and we'll come back to you in 2 years when your contract's up. Then of course that's what it'll become.
So it sounds to me like there's kind of two parts then. So there's as you say, the surfacing the, hey, here's the great features that you're going to get. Yes, everyone kind of expects to be connected, but things like guarantees around uptime and things like that, where it's kind of, as you pointed out, the work from home example. I think that's a good one because it's probably one of the most common examples of where you want to make sure you've got good stability and that your network's not going to drop, and if it does, it can be resolved quickly. Those kind of things are valuable features. So I guess there's that, but there's, as you said, the importance of surfacing when you're doing things for that user. If you don't tell them, then you haven't really done anything. Like, yes, you're connected, but here's the other things that we're doing for you.
And that's what I meant at the start about operators starting to position for growth rather than just positioning against churn. Because if you're only interested in fighting against churn, then you would basically offer all those value-added services to all customers. So all the service would be the same because you want to give everything to all customers so that they don't churn away. But that doesn't generate any growth. Um,
Yeah.
so it's about becoming more strategic in how you position it so that yes, you have a great service so that customers want to stay with you, but you're also positioning those services and features so that the consumers that are interested in having a quality product then pay more, basically. And that's kind of how we, in Omdia's research in terms of how we help customers, it's all about how you do that, how you position those services in your stack, so that you get more customers paying more money over time.
Hmm. And I guess the operator or the ISP is the one who has the touch point with the end user, the consumer of that service. Many of us work in the kind of vendor ecosystem, the value chain of providing, solutions to these operators, but we don't have that interaction with the end user. So we depend on the operator sharing that feedback and that, joint communication of, tell us what's valuable to your consumers. We'll help you to address that with our solutions. And that's kind of, the value chain of the broadband ecosystem. Do you have a view of whether the vendors in that space and those that are operating in the value chain for the operators can do more? Should we be doing more, or is that just down to the operator? What's your view?
No, I think so. Because one of the advantages that vendors have is that they operators with all different kinds of operators around the world. So you get a view really on what's working well, who's doing good. So I think you can bring that kind of best of breed practice into an operator. This is how we think you, you should position these services, how you can market these services to get more attention and things, and help the operators in that way. Also, I talked a little bit about risk before, but I think also they kind of have to share some of that risk. At least position their, especially around value-added services. Be willing to offer. Kind of a price list that enables or helps the operators kind of take more risk, if that makes sense. And then, if the operator is more successful, then the vendor becomes more successful as well. So there's various ways that I think vendors can definitely help, and I think operators kind of need that help. It has to be a partnership type of scenario rather than the operators doing all the work and vendors just supplying boxes or services.
Okay. So in terms of the, I guess, the priority of value-added services that operators are adopting, I guess there are some that will be more highly valuable versus others that they might have as kind of point in time in the future that they're likely to adopt. What are the priorities you're seeing at the moment in terms of the value-added services that operators are prioritizing?
Yeah, so I think it definitely starts with the quality of experience bit that we mentioned earlier. As you say, that's become again a big focus. So obviously anything around kind of Wi-Fi management, that would include, I think, parental controls these days. And some of those parental controls, have become more advanced and actually useful. The old parental controls, which were just so clunky and hard to use, so no one ever used them. But they really have come on in their sophistication these days. So certainly those types of valuable service would be, I'd say, essential really, that operators offer. And then the next one, and I've mentioned it several times, so you can tell that it's an area that I'm a firm believer in, is then the security side. And you see more operators taking that now as part of their core marketing messages. So, they have things like, we have the fastest network, we have the most reliable network. Now you're starting to see, and now when we offer the most secure network. So you're starting to see that come in. So I definitely see that security is probably the next one. Again, I still think it's a bit of a shame that's been positioned more of a quality experience thing. I think if positioned correctly, you can drive growth as well, but we're certainly seeing that as being a key area. And then you're starting to see some, I guess, interesting ones, but are still being played with from an operator point of view, both in terms of internally, but also you start to see interesting types of experiments going on commercially as well, and that's around things like perhaps things like prioritization and kind of Wi-Fi sensing and things like that. So, but those tend to be perhaps a little bit out into not into the future, but operators are still quite unsure how to kind of position those types of value-added service.
Yeah, and maybe one we haven't talked about at all, actually. And I know it's always in the mind of anyone when they think about value-added services and broadband devices is smart home. And I think it probably one of the reasons that it's appealing is because it's really easy to demonstrate the value to your end user, right? It's a very tangible thing compared to some of the others where you maybe have to surface and present the features that you're offering them kind of front and center and remind them. I think smart home is kind of ever present in its nature. I guess it's super sticky as well, because if you adopt a certain smart home ecosystem, then you're probably going to stick with that for a long time. So you don't want to be changing your provider and having to port your whole smart home to some other platform. So you kind of got the stickiness there, and I imagine the value as well, in terms of additional features and things. So I can see that being an area of growth. Are you seeing much adoption so far in that? Or, I mean, you kind of touched on maybe it's a little bit in the future. Do you see anyone that's kind of good use case of an example of smart home?
No, I mean, smart home has been, I mean, it's a topic in itself, really. So I
Mhm.
guess that's why I haven't touched it, because you have value-added services. I always think of those as being more like the cybersecurity and things like that. And then smart home is like a kind of a topic in its own, and we could have another hour conversation on that. I mean, and telcos have, you know, it's not new. I mean, telcos have been investing in smart home for many years, and yes, some have been successful in it. We've probably seen a lot more that haven't been successful, though. So the ones that have been successful are ones that have invested massively, and mainly around things like home security,
Yeah.
because they just say consumers kind of understand that they know what home security is and they know the value of it. You still get to a point where only a certain amount of consumers are willing to spend X amount of dollars per month on it on a service,
Mm.
but still they kind of get it and they understand it. You also get others that tell us in Canada is a good example where they've invested in other things like smart energy and also health services and things like that. But they've become, I guess, rarer because again it requires big investments. Where the other telcos I've kind of failed. Well, you could say where the whole smart home ecosystem has then failed. I would then say, beyond. So you get those big markets like home security, health, which requires big investment, and then you
Yeah.
kind of get this massive tail. Um, and where that has failed, I think, is that you've got two barriers with smart home. One is value, and the other one is price. So if you just take any type of simple type of smart home application or device, that let's just say it's a home security webcam type service with a cloud service. So you get if you're going to a shop as a consumer and you go to buy that type of product, you think, well, what value does this actually bring me? I mean, you can
Yeah.
even take a simpler example, smart light bulb. Normal light bulb costs, actually, let's say $1, a smart light bulb costs $10. So as a consumer, you're going, if I'm going to, what value does this bring me as a consumer? And then you think, well, and it costs 10 times more. So,
Yeah.
that's a big investment for me to take it home and find out what that value is. So those are the two values. So, sorry, those are the two barriers that telcos face. So one is that if they're going to move into smart home, they need to make sure that they're bringing true value down to the customer, and they need to make sure that it's at a price that allows the consumer to put that in their home and kind of almost experiment, because every household is going to be different, and everybody's going to use that smart light bulb or that camera in a completely different way. So by making it more affordable, it allows them to kind of innovate themselves and kind of invest in this type of technology. But that doesn't mean just making it cheap, because if you just make it cheap, then it doesn't really bring that much value. Telcos really have to think about what value can we bring in the smart home? How can we make this technology usable and valuable to our customers at a price point that they can afford? And that's those if you can start to break those two barriers, and then you can start to have I think a bigger uptick in that space, and that's where things like Wi-Fi sensing could come in,
Yeah.
because by using that type of technology, then it might make some of those use cases more valuable, and it might start to make them more sense to the consumer. So there could be some good opportunities for telcos in that space, but they still need to break those two barriers down. So how do you make this stuff really useful, more useful than, say, an Amazon or a Google could supply, and how do you make it more affordable?
Yeah, I completely agree. I do have a view on this in that I don't think the smart home is really that smart yet. I think, you're still telling it what to do. Yes, there's automation and there's things like that, but I think, we haven't quite got to the real smart, let's say the intelligent home. I'd like to kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah,
I think there's still a big step that we need to take to get to where it becomes really valuable, exactly as you just outlined.
yeah, exactly. Because that's that value thing. Because if it's not really that smart, then how much value does it really bring over a non-smart product?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it's about that. Um, it's about adding that intelligence. It's about getting rid of the fragmentation so that devices can talk to each other. And it makes it easier for the consumers to create new use cases for those technologies that again benefit them personally. So yeah, it's about all that. Yeah.
And Wi-Fi sensing, I completely agree. I think using that for presence detection and things like that, I think are great drivers of turning, getting up that step that we need to do for it to be intelligent and intuitive, rather than just being, I've set up some automation that when I don't know, unlock the door and my light will turn on or my heater will turn on. But I think there's a long way to go. But I'm quite excited about the potential of that. And we talked about Wi-Fi sensing. We didn't talk much, but I imagine it plays a big part in terms of AI supporting that as well, right? Because actually, if you look at the router or the broadband gateway in the home, the amount of data that device holds about just what's going on in that home. All our devices are connected. So we have more connected devices than ever before. So actually, that's really well placed. Rather than having a separate smart home hub, having the router be that kind of heartbeat of what's going on in the home, and using that to say, okay, look at the patterns, look at what's going on in the home, and you can use that to kind of characterize what you need in that smart home, right?
Yeah, yeah. If it both from a platform point of view, so it's doing that work itself internally, but also then from a consumer use case point of view as well. I mean that you mentioned the smart home not being intelligent and you having to go in and kind of almost program it yourself. Whereas, if all you have to say is to the home, I'm going on holiday now, and it kind of does everything for you rather than you having to go into each app going on when holidays. So I need to set this up as holiday mode, that up. Do you see what I mean? AI technology is going to be really quite valuable, and not just in the smart home, but in probably all use cases you can think of.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you pair that with, I guess it depends how much you want the AI to be doing for you, or to know about, what's going on in your home, right? And I think that always comes down to trust in the tools that you're using, and exactly back to what you said before. I think as we go further and further into that world, the security becomes more important and the privacy becomes more important. So those value added services, while today without the smart home, some people might say, well, I expect you to keep me safe online, I expect to be
Well,
connected. Actually, they become really, really important, because the data that will be known and accessible about you actually is far, far greater than it would have been. So that need is just, it just goes up massively.
yeah, and you mentioned a very important word there, which is trust. And that could be where operators have, again, if they play their cards right, could have a bit of an advantage, especially as they own the CPE in their home. So I know a lot of vendors now are putting the AI technology actually in the CPE devices, so it kind of keeps all that data locally rather than shipping it all into the cloud. So operators could really not just bring on that security or play that security card, but also play that trust card as well,
Yeah.
in parallel, so that you know going into that type of scenario that the operator becomes the trusted player in this rather than up consumers moving to more of an OTT type solution where everything goes into a cloud and you don't really know where that cloud exists, or who's able to access it. So yeah, so it could become an interesting and powerful asset for telcos if they do it correctly. So
Yeah, I fully agree. I think you're right. Trust is it kind of front and center when it comes to all of these things. Because, and yeah, you touched on there, I guess Edge AI as well is another powerful kind of technology that's going to support a lot of this. If you are able to trust that your operator is keeping the sensitive information within the bounds of your technology, doesn't leave the device, but other AI tools, cloud-based AI tools, can maybe leverage the output of that without having access to it, then yeah, you're probably going to have more trust that your operator is looking after your data to do it. But what you benefit from as a result of that is a more personalized experience, and it's more it's a better experience for you overall. It's like the more your operator knows about you, the better service it can deliver based on what it knows you need, want, and like to do. And it's, I did a similar kind of thing in the TV space, right? Recommendations based on all the things that you've watched. The recommendations become better the more you watch different things, and other people that watch this also likes this, so maybe you'd like that. And same, similar concept, albeit on a much grander stage, I think, overall. So we kind of coming to the looking at tomorrow. So I'm going to ask you to get out an imaginary crystal ball now and look kind of 10 years out into the future. Obviously, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but from where we sit today, what do you think the connected home looks like in 10 years from now? And what do we need to be doing today, operators and partners in that value chain, to be able to help get to that point?
Yeah, well, I think you've kind of already touched on it, or we started to touch on it, because to me that's the big inflection point at the moment. I mean, if you look back in time, I think that the really big change, which is in the consumer space, of course, firstly was the internet, then broadband internet changed everything, then smartphones kind of changed everything. These are the big changes in the consumer market that all other trends are then based on. And I think AI technology is the next one. So I think over the next 10 years, I mean, it's hard to predict what we'll be doing in 10 years' time, but I think AI will be a massive part of that. I think it will completely change how we interact with the digital world. And so that's definitely going to be the big one. I'm not a massive, and others will disagree, of course, but I'm not a massive kind of believer in we'll be all walking around in VR glasses and things like that. So I or 3D screens and things. I see this innovation at trade shows and stuff like that, but I never quite see it. But certainly AI technology is going to be the big one, and I think that will really change how we communicate with the digital world, both at home and of course on the move as well.
With how AI is progressing, I think one of the tools I can see that each of us will have in our arsenal at some point in the future is we'll have our own AI assistant that does things on our behalf, and it kind of helps us to manage our daily lives and our schedules and things like that. And then you'll have features within the broadband device and gateway that will also be leveraging AI. Do you think they exist in 10 years from now? Do you think they exist as separate, or do you think they come together by that point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we used to have similar discussions about kind of the voice interfaces. Will the winner of that be the kind of the central part of the home? So so if you're an Alexa user, for example, does everything become Alexa because you only want to use one voice interface? You don't want to have Alexa and Google and something else operator in your home. So that, yeah, it's a good question, and I guess it'd be hard to know whether there'll ever be just one interface that you use in that way. But I think what history has taught us is that it's not going to be the telco that probably going to win that. If there is one or even two AI interfaces that you used on a daily basis, it's unlikely to be the telco one that sits in the broadband router.
Yeah.
So I think if I was a telco going in that direction, then I'd be trying to think, well, how can we work and how can we integrate with those players?
Yeah.
I'd say telcos in general, because I know that there are some like in Asia that are much bigger and much more powerful in their nation, so they might have a bigger chance. But I'm talking about telcos in general around the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think it's more about how the telco can leverage those and enhance their features, but rather than trying to build themselves and losing the race, that they should leverage what others have
I mean,
done.
an interesting aspect of it is this concept of sovereignty, because there is a a lot of discussions and things going on around sovereignty. I know that governments and regulators and also enterprises, of course, are very interested in it. And of course, so there could be an element of that starts to play a little bit in the telcos' favor. But be interested to see how that kind of pans out. But that's something that operators, of course, will have to watch.
Thanks, Michael. I think I agree with what you said earlier. I'd love to get into the whole smart home conversation. I think there's much more we could probably cover today, but yeah, in the given the limited time, I think maybe one for another day. But I just want to say thank you for joining me today. It's been a great pleasure to have you on, and yeah, keep putting out the great value that you are for the broadband ecosystem. I would encourage anybody to go and download the Future of the Connected Home report, and I'll include a link with these episode notes as well. Any final thoughts for today, Michael?
No, I think we've covered a lot, John. So yeah, thanks you for the opportunity. And yeah, hope we can speak again soon.
All right, thank you.